He was a man who had everything, or at least, that's what the world believed. Ethan Blackwood, a self-made millionaire, lived in a sprawling mansion on the city's edge, surrounded by luxury, yet suffocated by silence. His home was as grand as his bank account. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and rooms so large they echoed, but not a single soul to share it with. To those who saw him in magazines or at high-end events, Ethan was the man who had conquered life. But behind the closed doors of his mansion, the truth was far less glamorous. He wasn't cold-hearted by nature. Life had made him that way. Betrayals by those he loved most had turned his heart into a fortress no one could break through. Then came her. She arrived one rainy evening, a maid hired by his assistant to maintain the vast mansion. Ethan didn't even look at her twice. At first, she wasn't like the others. She kept to herself, her head always bowed, and most notably, she wore a mask. Not just any mask, a plain white fabric covering the lower half of her face, leaving only her solemn, tired eyes visible. At first, Ethan thought nothing of it. Perhaps she was sick or overly cautious. But days turned into weeks, and the mask never came off. Not when she cleaned the chandeliers, not when she worked in the garden under the blazing sun, not even when she passed him in the hallways late at night. He found himself wondering, was she hiding a scar, a secret, or something far more dangerous? But it wasn't just the mask, it was her silence. She never spoke unless necessary, and when she did, her voice was soft, almost broken, as if she were afraid of being heard. And then, the night came. A storm raged outside, winds howling like ghosts through the corridors of his mansion. A sudden crash echoed from the library. A vase shattered. Ethan rushed in, expecting a burglar, but instead, he found her, the maid, her hands trembling, her mask askew, and he saw a glimpse of the face beneath it for the first time. What he saw made his heart stop. She wasn't a stranger. She was someone he thought he'd never see again. The silence of Ethan Blackwood's mansion wasn't just a lack of noise. It was a reflection of his heart. Years ago, Ethan wasn't the man the world saw today. Back then, he wasn't defined by his wealth or his cold demeanor. He was just a young man chasing dreams. A dream of building something meaningful, something his late parents would have been proud of. Growing up in a modest home, Ethan learned the value of hard work early on. His father was a factory worker, his mother a part-time librarian. They didn't have much, but they had each other. That was enough. But life has a way of testing people in cruel ways. A tragic accident took both his parents when he was just 22, leaving him alone in a world that suddenly felt too big. Determined not to let their sacrifices go to waste, Ethan poured himself into work, building his business from scratch, working sleepless nights, and sacrificing friendships, relationships, and even his happiness. Eventually, his tech startup soared, and money followed like a floodgate had been opened. But success came with a cost. The people around him changed. Friends he once trusted whispered behind his back. Distant relatives resurfaced with fake smiles and open hands. And worst of all, the woman he once loved left him. Sarah, the only person who had ever seen him struggle, walked away when his wealth became more important than his presence. She said he was becoming a stranger, that money had hardened him. Her final words haunted him. "You built an empire, Ethan, but you lost your heart." And maybe she was right. From that moment on, Ethan vowed never to let anyone get too close again. He surrounded himself with walls, not just the stone and marble of his mansion, but the emotional barriers that no one could break. And then, there was her, the maid. Her name was Lena. At least, that's what his assistant had told him. She was a mystery wrapped in silence. She arrived every morning, worked diligently, and left without a word. But what unsettled Ethan wasn't just the mask she wore, it was the way she carried herself. She wasn't like the others. Other maids would steal glances at him, some even daring to flash fake smiles, hoping to catch the eye of the wealthy, eligible bachelor. But Lena? She avoided his gaze entirely, always keeping her distance, her movements precise and careful. Yet, behind that mask, there was something familiar. One evening, as Ethan passed the kitchen, he caught her standing by the window, staring into the rain. He should have kept walking, but something made him stop. For a brief moment, he saw the way her shoulders trembled, the way she clutched the counter as if holding back a pain too heavy to bear. She wasn't just a maid doing a job. She was someone running from something, and Ethan recognized that feeling all too well. He knew what it was like to wear a mask, not a physical one like Lena's, but the kind you put on to hide your brokenness from the world. What was she hiding? Or more importantly, who was she hiding from? Ethan wasn't the type of man who pried into people's lives. If there was one thing he had learned, it was that secrets were like locked doors. Some were meant to stay closed, but Lena's secret was different. There was something about her that gnawed at him, something unsettling yet familiar. He told himself it was nothing, that she was just another employee, a stranger passing through his life like all the others. But the more he tried to ignore it, the more his mind fixated on the mystery behind the mask. And then, one night, everything changed. The storm outside was relentless, rain hammering against the windows like a desperate plea. Ethan had been working late in his home office when he heard it, a loud crash echoing through the mansion. His first instinct was that something had broken. Maybe a picture frame knocked over by the wind, but then he heard something else, a muffled cry. Tense, he followed the sound, his steps quiet against the polished floors. The moment he reached the library, he stopped. There she was. Lena knelt on the floor, surrounded by the shattered remains of an antique vase. Her hands trembled as she tried to gather the broken pieces, but her body was frozen in place. Ethan took a step closer, and that's when he saw it. Her mask had slipped, hanging loosely from one ear, revealing the lower half of her face. His breath caught in his throat. The scar, a long, faint scar, ran from the corner of her lips to her jawline, a mark that had once been smooth, unblemished skin, and suddenly everything clicked. A memory flashed in his mind. Years ago, a woman who once meant everything to him, a woman who had disappeared without a trace. His heart pounded, denial battling against recognition. It couldn't be her. It wasn't possible. Yet as Lena slowly turned to meet his gaze, her eyes wide with panic, Ethan felt the air leave his lungs. He knew those eyes. He had loved those eyes. Lena? His voice was barely a whisper, but in that moment, it felt like a thunderclap. Her expression crumbled, and for the first time since she had stepped into his house, he saw the truth, the fear, the pain, the familiarity. And just like that, Ethan realized the woman he had spent years trying to forget had been right under his roof all along. The silence between them was louder than the storm outside. Ethan's mind spiraled, a tangled mess of disbelief and anger. His chest tightened as he stared at Lena, the woman who wasn't just a maid, but Sarah, the same woman who had walked away from him all those years ago, the woman who once promised forever, only to vanish without a word. His voice, sharper now, cut through the tension. "It's you, isn't it, Sarah?" Lena flinched, her hands gripping the broken vase pieces so tightly that her knuckles turned white. I don't know what you're talking about, sir," she whispered, her voice cracking. But the way she avoided his eyes, the tremor in her voice, it betrayed her. Ethan felt a surge of emotion, a storm of rage, hurt, and confusion swirling inside him. "Don't lie to me," he said, his voice hoarse. "I know it's you. The scar, your eyes, I could never forget." Tears welled up in Lena's eyes, but she blinked them away. "I'm just a maid, Mr. Blackwood," she insisted. "I'm no one to you." But that was the problem. She wasn't no one. She had been his everything. The stakes soared even higher when Ethan's assistant, Mark, suddenly appeared in the doorway, his gaze bouncing between the shattered vase and the raw tension between his boss and the maid. "Sir, is everything all right?" Mark's voice was cautious, as if sensing the fragile line Ethan was teetering on. Lena's face drained of color. Ethan realized it then. She wasn't just hiding from him. She was hiding from someone else. His mind raced. Was someone after her? Was she in danger? He clenched his jaw. "Mark, leave us," Ethan said, his voice cold but steady. Once they were alone again, Ethan took a step closer to Lena. She backed away, her breathing ragged. "Tell me the truth," he demanded softly. "Why are you here? And why are you pretending to be someone else?" Lena finally broke. Her voice, now trembling, said, "Because the woman you knew, the woman you loved, doesn't exist anymore." His heart thudded painfully against his ribs. "Then who are you?" Ethan's voice cracked, betraying the hurt that simmered beneath his anger. She hesitated, her body rigid with fear, before finally whispering, "Someone who made a mistake. Someone who's running from a past you'll never understand." The weight of her words hung between them, raising the stakes even higher. It wasn't just about an old love story anymore. It was about survival, secrets, and danger lurking somewhere close. And for the first time in years, Ethan realized that the woman he once thought had broken his heart might have had hers broken even more. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was Lena's shaky breathing. Ethan stood there, his heart pounding, but his anger had begun to unravel, thread by thread, into something else, something raw, something painful. He watched as Lena slowly placed the broken vase pieces onto the table, her hands still trembling. It wasn't just fear, it was exhaustion, the kind that comes from running for too long. And at that moment, Ethan didn't see the maid. He didn't even see the woman who had left him. He saw a person who was barely holding herself together. "Lena, or Sarah, or whoever you are." Ethan's voice was softer now, almost a whisper. Just tell me, please. Her lip quivered. What difference would it make? She muttered. To you, I'm just a liar, a runaway. He swallowed hard. You're more than that. Lena's eyes shot up to meet his, and for a brief second, Ethan saw a flicker of something. Hope, maybe, before it disappeared behind the walls she had built. She exhaled a shaky breath, and then, with her voice breaking, she said, I didn't leave because I wanted to, Ethan. I left because I had no choice. His chest tightened. No choice? Lena clenched her fists at her sides. Do you think it was easy for me? Walking away from you? From us? Her voice cracked, and suddenly all the pain she had kept buried for years came spilling out. She continued her words a torrent now. I was scared. Scared of what would happen if you found out the truth about me. About my family. About the people I was tied to. Ethan's mind spun. Her family. She had never spoken much about them before. All he knew was that she had a complicated past. One she never let him touch. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I didn't want to drag you into my mess. Ethan's throat burned. I would have fought for you. Her smile was bitter. And that's exactly why I left. The room felt smaller now, suffocating. And then, Lena broke. Her shoulders shook. And without warning, a single tear slipped down her cheek. She wiped it away quickly like she was used to hiding her pain, but Ethan saw it. He saw all of it. The late nights, the fear, the loneliness. And in that moment, something shifted. Because Ethan, the cold, untouchable millionaire, the man who had built his empire brick by brick, was suddenly just a man standing in front of a woman who was just as broken as he was. And the audience feels it too. It's not about money anymore. It's not about betrayal. It's about two people, scarred by life, haunted by choices, standing at a crossroads. And the question hanging between them wasn't why did you leave anymore. It was, can we ever fix this?